Imagine watching two candidates in a job interview. The first answers every question with precision, confidence, and obvious expertise. The second answers just as well, but halfway through the conversation knocks their coffee cup off the table, scrambles to pick it up, and spends an awkward moment apologizing. At the end of the day, which one do you want to work with? Most people, when asked to predict, say the first. Clean, competent, no accidents. But when psychologist Elliot Aronson at the University of Minnesota actually ran this experiment in 1966, the data said something different. Aronson recruited college students to listen to a recording of a quiz contestant answering difficult academic questions. In one version, the contestant performed brilliantly, answering 92% of the questions correctly. In another version, the contestant performed at an average level, getting roughly 30% right. Then Aronson added a twist. In half the recordings, at the end of the session, the contestant could be heard knocking over a cup of coffee, exclaiming, "Oh my goodness, I've spilled coffee all over my new suit." Participants then rated how much they liked each contestant. The brilliant contestant who spilled coffee was rated as significantly more likable than the brilliant contestant who did not. The small, embarrassing human moment made the near-perfect person more appealing, not less. Aronson called this the pratfall effect, borrowing the theatrical term for a physical stumble in comedy. The findings seem to invert a basic assumption about social performance, that excellence requires showing no cracks. But here is the part that complicates any simple takeaway. The mediocre contestant who spilled coffee was rated as less likable than the mediocre contestant who did not. The same stumble, performed by someone who was already struggling, lowered how others perceive them rather than raising it. The pratfall effect does not apply to everyone. It applies specifically to people who are already perceived as highly competent. For them, a mistake functions as a humanizing signal. For people who have not established their competence, the same mistake functions as a confirming signal, confirming what was already suspected. The mechanism behind this distinction runs through what researchers describe as social distance. Exceptional ability in another person can produce not just admiration, but a kind of subtle discomfort, the sense that this person is operating in a category different from yours, that they don't have the same struggles, that the gap between you is permanent and impossible to cross. When that person makes a visible mistake, something shifts. The gap narrows. They become approachable in a way that pure, unbroken excellence never quite manages, because pure excellence communicates not just ability, but a different and presumably easier life. The stumble signals otherwise. It says they're in the same species as you. And paradoxically, that signal increases how much you trust them, how much you want to be around them, and how much you're willing to learn from them, precisely because they've stopped requiring you to feel smaller before you can take them seriously. This is why the effect has been observed across domains that on the surface seem to have nothing in common. In leadership, managers who admit uncertainty or acknowledge mistakes to their teams are rated as more trustworthy and generate higher psychological safety scores than managers who project unbroken competence. The admission doesn't undermine their authority. In the context of already established expertise, it reinforces it, because it signals that the leader's confidence is calibrated to reality, not performed for the audience watching. When a surgeon says, "This is a harder case than average, and I want to think carefully before we proceed," the transparency doesn't reduce your trust in the surgeon. It increases it because it shows their self-assessment is honest rather than designed to reassure you regardless of the facts. In marketing, brands that acknowledge product limitations or setbacks, "We made this wrong. Here's what we're doing about it," generate higher consumer trust scores than brands that maintain a posture of unbroken quality claims, particularly after a visible failure. The transparency reads as strength when the brand already has equity. In contexts where brand credibility hasn't been established, the same admission of failure accelerates mistrust instead of building it. In interpersonal relationships, research following up on Aronson's original study found that people rated as highly attractive were liked even more when they disclosed a small, embarrassing personal story, while people rated as less attractive were liked somewhat less after the same disclosure. The rule holds across physical, social, and professional domains. The stumble matters, but only relative to the pedestal the person is already standing on. Social psychologist Robert Helmreich and his collaborators refined the original finding further across a series of studies in the late 1960s and early 1970s. They found that the pratfall effect was strongest among participants who reported moderate levels of self-esteem. People with very high self-esteem didn't like the brilliant person meaningfully more after the stumble, possibly because they felt less threatened by exceptional competence to begin with and didn't need the humanizing cue. When you're already secure in your own abilities, watching someone talented spill their coffee doesn't close a gap for you because you didn't experience one. You were already standing next to them. People with very low self-esteem actually preferred the brilliant person who did not stumble, possibly because a flawless, slightly unreachable figure fit a pre-existing internal model of how superior people are supposed to behave. In that model, imperfection is a violation, not a relief. The effect ran most powerfully through the broad middle of the self-esteem spectrum, which is where most people actually live. Those who look at a person of visible excellence and feel the mild, quiet sting of comparison that most people recognize immediately and almost nobody talks about directly. What this means practically is something that cuts directly against the dominant cultural pressure of how people present themselves publicly. Social media, professional networking, job interviews, and most high-stakes performance contexts reward the appearance of smooth, polished, error-free execution. The implicit message is that visible mistakes are a liability to be minimized, managed, or hidden as fast as possible. Aronson's research, and every study that has followed it since, says something more nuanced. Visible mistakes are a liability only when they occur before competence has been established, or in a context where competence hasn't yet been demonstrated and the audience has no foundation on which to place them. Once the floor has been set, once the people around you know what you can actually do, the stumble is frequently an asset because it does something no amount of polished performance can replicate. It closes the distance between someone and the people watching them. The most reliable way to be seen as both excellent and human, it turns out, is to be both in that order and to let the second half of that equation become visible without engineering it. The mistake has to be real and incidental, not staged. People read perform vulnerability as the same kind of management as perform perfection, and they trust it just as little. Subscribe, because every week we bring you one more counterintuitive finding that changes how you think about how you're being perceived.